So, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the British Chamber of Commerce in the Dominican Republic, we would like to welcome you all to today's event, Building Supply Chain Resilience. As we all know, businesses of all sizes and sectors across every region have been impacted in an unprecedented way by the current pandemic caused by COVID-19. On this webinar, organized with the collaboration of the British Chamber of Commerce in China and the Dominican Association of Exporters, we will discuss through a panel of recognized experts what actions are required for building supply chain resilience in order to be able to predict and avoid unexpected risk events and as well to respond and recover efficiently from potential disruptions. We will hear now from Elizabeth Mena, President of the Dominican Association of Exporters, who will share with us some welcoming remarks. Elizabeth.
Good morning and good evening, everybody. As the world and the global supply chain looks on a way to continue business as usual, it is important to take a moment to sit down and to review on the lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic. Companies in the normal course of business are used to threats to supply chains, such as natural disasters, accidents, and even intentional disruptions. Therefore, the notion of resilience is not new. Most of the international companies have worked on the availability and to successfully confront the unforeseen as a core element of success. But recent events have opened our eyes, and we have realized the existence of a number of types of threats that the world have forgotten even existed. Therefore, the concept of resilience has taken on even more significance in the supply chain management. With this in mind, I thank both the British Chamber of Commerce in the Dominican Republic and the British Chamber of Commerce in China for this event and the opportunity for the Exports Association of the Dominican Republic to have this group of experts to tell us about the importance of building supply chain resilience. Again, thank you. Good day to those in DR and good night to those in China.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, now I have the pleasure to open and introduce our panelists. The panel will be moderated by Stephen Lynch, Managing Director at the British Chamber of Commerce in China, and Odile Minino, Executive Vice President of the Dominican Association of Exporters. Our first panelist is Carlos Guillermo Flaquer, former Director of Parks and Logistics at DP World. Having previously worked in Microsoft Dynamics as Product and Marketing Coordinator for Latin America. In 2010, he graduates in Business Administration at the Pontificia Universidad Católica Madre y Maestra in the Dominican Republic. In 2013, completes an MBA in Entrepreneurship at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. And in 2016, completes a master's degree in Supply Chain Management and Engineering at the Polytechnic University of Valencia. In addition, he has completed courses in competitive strategy at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich and in creativity, innovation, and change at Penn State University. In 2015, he was part of the committee that drafted the legal framework that rules the interoperability of logistics centers and operators in the Dominican Republic. Carlos Flaquer is currently Vice Minister of Free Zones and Special Regimes at the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and NCNEs of the Dominican Republic. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Francesca, and good morning to everyone. I am trying to put the presentation, Francesca, but says the host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Try now.
Yep. Okay, here we go. One second. Okay. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Good. Well, good morning to all, and thank you to the British Chamber of Commerce in the Dominican Republic, the British Chamber of Commerce in China, and also Ado Expo for organizing this event. I have to be honest, it feels good to dust off a little bit of my old responsibilities. Now my focus is a little bit, although still involved within supply chain, it has changed a little bit more towards free zones, as Francesca was saying. But having worked in logistics for almost 8 years, it's something that I feel very passionate about, and also understand the importance and criticism of the supply chain, especially in times like this. Now, yesterday, while I was preparing this presentation, I was struggling a bit with what to speak and how to address this. So building supply chain resilience. And why was I struggling? Because it's supply chain is a very wide concept, and being a very wide concept, it all depends on which supply chain are you speaking about. What supply chain are you referring to? But one thing that helped me was that focusing on the definition of building a supply chain, the resilience, right? And within this definition, I really like the key concepts involved here, which is supply chain's ability to be prepared for unexpected risks. One second. Estoy en una llamada, por favor. Sorry. Supply chain's ability to be prepared for unexpected risk events, responding and recovering quickly to potential disruptions, to return, and this is key, to its original situation or grow by moving to a new, more desirable state in order to increase customer service, market share, and financial performance. And that sort of gives the right framework for what I will be speaking to you today, very briefly. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, I was struggling. Why? Because supply chain, it all depends. What are you referring to, right? Which vertical are you referring to? Each one of these verticals, which is obviously just a small sample of different supply chains all over the world, has its own set of challenges and its own set of constraints. It is impossible for you to determine and establish a supply chain for food and beverages that applies to retail or applies to pharmaceutical. All of these different verticals have different places from where they source, have difference in specialized manufacturing. Some of them have really high inventory costs in the case of pharmaceutical, the case of wine, medical devices, wine and spirits. And also you have some expiration constraints. You cannot have excess inventory or have inventory buffers for products such as pharmaceuticals, right? And it all depends also in pharmaceuticals where you have such inventories. In places where there's high humidity, the expiration date is a lot smaller than having that in less humid places. So again, each one has its own set of risks, and there's no one single answer for you to be able to build supply chain resilience in these different sectors. Now, what I do know is the first mistake a lot of companies make while trying to look at how to change or how to modify my supply chain to adapt to especially this situation, and it's looking at the problem from the company lens. It is important for you to understand how you can lower fixed costs in logistics. It is important for you to be able to look at how to make my supply chain more nimble, how to integrate technology, but it's not the basis or the starting point for you to build this resilience. the main basis is focusing in the customer. The customer begins and ends all. And that, if one message I want to transmit to you guys today, is specifically that one. And it applies to everything, right? It all begins and ends with the customer. So with COVID, there was an old way of doing things, and now there's a new way of doing things. Thus, my message, or my number one point today, will be focusing on that. Now, in my previous job, we used to mention a lot about hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure is the hard assets, the ports, the roads, the airports, the trucks, and that is a big important part of logistics. Now, the soft infrastructure, the processes, the legal framework, is equally as important, and in many cases more important. So my 4 points that I will be presenting to you guys today focuses a lot more on the soft part of building supply chain resilience. And on the last point, I include some of that hard aspects of building supply chain resilience. So as I was speaking to you about the new ways and the old ways of COVID, the most important point, and I put this as number one, is to take time to understand your customer and understand the trends. Why? This is a snapshot of some of the different sectors and how it has been affected since February, where we started with the, well, actually March, we started with the facing the COVID situation, and goes all the way to May. I was looking at some more recent data, but it's more or less the same. And you see how habits have changed. Definitely habits have changed. We were speaking before entering this with Odile, and I know because I've spoken with her before, you know, Odile faces the issue that she has 3 kids at her house. She has to work. There are different ages of the 3 different kids, which different responsibilities, different demands, and she has had to adapt to that. Now, for certain, a lot of her habits have changed. And thus, it's important to understand for any company in the different sectors that they're involved, what habits have changed. What are my customers demanding? What are they looking for? That's the starting base of you setting up any strategy towards supply chain. Again, it is important to focus on how can I become more nimble. It is important to understand how can I shift some of my production, where do I locate my warehouses, how to reduce my fixed cost. All of that is important. But this is, for me, the starting base of any discussion towards building supply chain resilience. What has increased? What has decreased? But more important than that is understanding habits. The human nature is very predictable in many senses. If you study it hard, I think the best example of that is social media and how they have been able to penetrate through understanding the human nature and habits. So it's important for any company these days to spend time in understanding this, because some of these habits will change forever. Most of them will not, but some of them will. So it is important for that, and the main basis of that is because you have to anticipate. And anticipation, for me, is one of the biggest and most important concepts in business. How can I anticipate demand? How can I anticipate what my customers will be doing so I can be the first to do that? And in logistics, anticipating trends is key to building that resilience. Now, the second point, which is equally as important, is building and focusing on building a resilient team. And I experienced that firsthand when COVID started. I was still working at the port as logistics director, and we were scrambling. We were everywhere because then all of a sudden we had a curfew that could not be met because our operations are 24 hours. We had ships waiting to dock. There were operations, so we were all scrambling. And the way that we were able to face that through our leadership was first with continuous communication. delegation, being comfortable being uncomfortable, and building multifunctional teams. The perfect example of that during that time, we set up 2 calls per day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. We had to be communicating. We had to know what was going on because so many things were happening on a day-to-day basis. And that was, I think, key for the team to be able to sort out some of these hectic things that were happening hour by hour. And in logistics and supply chain, that is day to day. I worked on logistics, as I said, for 7 years, and especially more on the 3PL logistics added value in the last year. And it's a continuous operation. There are issues that pop up every day, and you have to face them. You have to face them. So the stronger the team that you can build, the more resilient that you can have the whole setup. So it is important, again, to build multifunctional teams, people that can deal with different topics, different aspects of the supply chain. Because if you concentrate decision on a single person, then it takes time to make decisions. You need to be quick to react. You need to be agile, right? And if you want the supply chain to be agile, you need to have a team that is agile. So again, point number 2, which I mentioned here is, to build a resilient supply chain, you have to focus on building a resilient team. Now, third, and not less important, is you have to invest in digital infrastructure. I think everyone here in this call, I think, would agree with this, that there's this higher need than ever for a data-driven, analytics-enabled supply chain. And it's very simple, or it's explained very simple in the push-pull concept, which is a strategy widely known that has had a ton of positive effect in supply chain. And it's not mainly, I would say 99% driven by technology. The push strategy, right, is how companies push their products to the customer. It's like walking into a store and you see 100 shirts. The company's pushing the products to you. You select what's available. On the pull strategy, the company builds or manufactures the product based on the demand of the customer, therefore reducing inventory and a lot of the fixed costs that the companies face today. That is the perfect example. I always put this example on Dell. What Dell computers did back in, I think it was 2003, 2000, maybe less. I'm not sure about the date right now, but I remember me building my computer where I got online. I selected the color, I selected the RAM capacity that I wanted, the gigabyte storage, everything I selected. And based on that, I clicked, I bought the computer, and in a week or 2 weeks, I got my computer and it was exactly what I wanted. That is the perfect example of a pull strategy. And again, Zara Clothes does somewhat the same, where they have a headquarter in Spain that they continuously change designs based on the data that they receive from the different points of sale from different trends. So if jeans with some holes are increasing in sales, they start designing more of that. So they're not in a desk trying to figure out what to design. They let the customer tell them what to design. So it's sort of the same strategy. It's a different concept, different method, but it's the same push-pull concept. So again, the only thing that allows for this to happen is data. It's technology. So any company looking at building supply chain resilience, and this applies to everything. Remember I said in the beginning, it's very hard to go into details of how to build supply chain resilience that applies to all of the different verticals, all of the different sectors. These concepts that I have shown, the 3 different concepts, applies to everything. So you have to evaluate what in your specific sector is more prone for different technology. What is technologies available in my different sectors? ERP, CRM, but what specifically does that? Now, on the 4th one, and this I go into a little bit more technical details of this, is you have to be ready to think outside the box. For every company, you have to, and every one of the sectors that I've mentioned before, you have to be ready to think creatively, to look at this from scratch. And I will go into details now, but an example that I was mentioning yesterday to a person that we were discussing some public policy is they mentioned that they told me, you know, that has never been able to be executed. And what I told them was, it is different now. Why? Because COVID has changed everything, in the sense that if that specific law was not able to be pushed, right, because it affected revenue for the government, right now everything's on the table, because tax collection are so low that it allows for you to get creative, right? Because you're not collecting much, you're not collecting what you used to do. So why not now try new things to see if those have a positive impact? So the ground is set, it's fertile for you to evaluate new things, and the moment is now. So again, thinking outside the box is important. Charles Darwin said it a long time ago, where it's not the strongest of the species that survives, it's the one most responsive to change. And again, these 4 concepts that I'll present to you could apply to some of the different verticals. And there are a lot more concepts that you can start looking at, but the main focus is understanding your company, understanding your sector, understanding the customer, and then digging in as to how can I look at these differences. The first point that I'm more technical point that I am including this is the multi-sourcing. And this came into evidence in 2011. The importance of this came into evidence in 2011, specifically in Japan and Thailand, where they had some natural disaster happen back then, and the supply chain of the automotive sector was highly impacted. And there were vehicles almost ready to be shipped that could not be shipped because there were spare parts missing, that there were different components of the vehicles were still were not be able to get some supply. So after that, most of the automotive sectors that were highly concentrated on those areas started to do some multi-sourcing, not depending on a single source of sourcing. So that diversification can be achieved, and you have to go into that process of evaluating different suppliers, of setting up different suppliers in different areas, and building that redundancy that in times of crisis allows you to be flexible and not get stuck in one. Nearshoring. Nearshoring is actually one of the concept of nearshoring. Obviously, it's not this, but nearshoring is one of the aspects why I came into or made the decision to go into the public sector. And it's because of the opportunities right now for the Dominican Republic in this trade war going on that is making some companies decouple their supply chain from Asia and closer to their markets, right? Closer to the biggest market that there is, which is the East Coast of US. And what is the concept of nearshoring? It's very simple. If I have my manufacturing capacities in Asia, it takes around 35 days for me to ship and get that shipment into some of the states in the East Coast of US, 35 days, compared to having same manufacturing capacity in the Dominican Republic and being able to place that same production in any state of the US, at the East Coast of the US, in between 2 to 6 days, right? So that is a difference of almost 29 days in the worst of cases. And that means 29 days more of inventory, 29 days more that I need a facility that my supply chain is less flexible. So having nearshoring, the nearshoring concept is being able to manufacture closer to demand. So where is your demand? And therefore, where can I place my manufacturing closer to that demand is a concept that allows for also building supply chain resiliency. The third one is inventory and capacity buffers. That is self-explanatory, I think, and that is building redundancy in your in your inventory, how can I, and again, apply for all of the different sectors that I mentioned before because of the, again, high costs of inventory, but this could apply for certain products such as retail. And again, you have to evaluate your company and establish your own strategy, but inventory and capacity buffer works for certain sectors. Is having redundancy of my inventory. So if I have a situation in one of those supply centers or my logistics centers, I can easily satisfy demand from a different point. And then fourth, the manufacturing network diversification is also something that we've seen a lot in the recent years, where you have companies not only having own manufacturing, but also having contract manufacturing. So instead of having that fixed cost that takes to have my own manufacturing capabilities, having employees, having to supervise production, having to deal with a system, I subcontract that to a contract manufacturing, and that allows for more flexibility, whereas if I don't have any demand, I don't have any fixed costs because of my production. So again, looking at this from a manufacturing network diversification also allows for you to build some supply chain resilience. And again, look at it from your company perspective, look at it from your own vertical, and look at this as what of these concepts apply, and how can I think outside the box within any of these 4 concepts. And again, there are more, but this is just a small sample. So I just finished with this. Bill Gates said it 2, 3, 4 years ago, that there would be a pandemic that would shake the world and that would alter the way that we live, or day to day. And he says, again, and I've been watching a lot of his videos recently, he says that, again, this will happen another time and it will be even worse. So my message to you guys to finish off is there is no time to leave this thought of building, how can I build my supply chain resilience? How can I look at this creatively? How can I build resilient teams? The moment is now. You have to look at this. You have to find solutions. You have to be flexible enough for you to be able to adapt to any future situations. And again, the moment is now. So with that, I finish. And again, thank you for organizing this, and I will be attentive to your questions.
Thank you, Carlos, for that interesting information. Please feel free to make any questions or comments on the Q&A sections that you have on your screens. Now we're going to hear from Kathleen Nan. She holds an industrial engineering degree from the Universidad of Costa Rica, an MBA from University of California at Los Angeles. She is a director at the management consulting practice at PricewaterhouseCoopers Inter-Americas, based in San Jose, Costa Rica. Kathleen leads the strategy and operations services. She has more than 25 years of professional experience and 10 years of consulting experience leading transformation projects for regional, multilateral, and multinational corporations. Kathleen.
Thank you, Francesca. Let me know when you can see me. I'm starting my video. Okay, here we go. Can you give me access? Okay, share my screen. And you should be able to see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so thank you, Carlos, for your introduction. Very interesting perspective on supply chain resilience and how to build a resilient supply chain. My slides here, I wanted to focus on operations and operation strategic response and how you could better position your company as a whole in terms of operations to better support these disruptions that, as you mentioned, this was quite unexpected this year, but it seems like this is something that we're going to have to learn to adapt and incorporate into our strategic response as an organization. This crisis, and just to provide a little bit of background and context to our conversation here, is a little bit different than the last crisis that we lived, and much has been said about that difference. And 2009 crisis was more a financial crisis. This crisis, the 2020 crisis, is more a demand crisis. And what is this? And Carlos showed us some graphs just a few moments ago. This means that all these restrictions imposed by the governments in order to limit the infection rates throughout the world, what caused was a contraction in demand and some changes also in customers and how they reacted to these restrictions. And the things that became important were, the things that they were buying, the things that how they were reacting to these restrictions changed the way that they were consuming, their consuming trends. So this forced a sharp decline in demand, and is now slowly starting to recover. And we were talking to our colleagues from Asia just a few minutes before we started, and they were mentioning that in China and some parts in other countries in Asia, you're seeing people are returning to their more or less normal lives now. I mean, still a lot of sanitary restrictions, but still, you see people traveling, you see people on the streets, you see people going into the offices more and more now, and sort of returning to normal. So we are now faced with more. How do we do a path to recovery? How do we become more resilient and understand that this is something that will probably happen again, and that we need to incorporate into our planning and our strategic response in order to be better prepared when these disruptions happen. So just again, as a background, I was talking about the difference between the 2009 crisis and the 2020 crisis. And what you see here, these two graphs, what they're showing is the leaders, what the companies that became leaders as measured in their revenue and their earnings before interest and tax in 2013, they became leaders right after the crisis. So if you see the graphs here, the red line here, the leaders, they were leaders in 2010. And after 2010, they continued to be leading in terms of revenue and earnings. So what was the difference between what they were doing and what their other competitors were doing? As you can see, one of the things that really made the difference in terms of how they reacted was that they invested. They invested in growth areas, and they invested in capital, in capex. So instead of continuing to do a cost containment as they were doing during the disruption and during the crisis, these leaders were quick to react. They were quick to acquire distressed competitors or suppliers that were still recovering, and they were quick to invest in capex and in other growth areas, so that they were better positioned than their competitors, and they continued their growth, and they continued being the leaders with these two strategies. And what exactly were they investing in? Basically, as you can see on the graphs, they were investing in manufacturing flexibility. And I think we talked a little bit about this in our previous intervention. So what is manufacturing flexibility? It just, how long does it take your supply chain to respond to an unplanned increase in demand? So how better you position your operations as a whole, your manufacturing, your supply chain, to respond to changes in demand. That will translate into having a more manufacturing flexibility. So that in turn affects how quickly you can fulfill your orders and maintain your on-time delivery. So this is really where the biggest differences were found in terms of what the leaders were doing and what the average manufacturing organizations were doing to respond right after the crisis. Now, we have here what we call our framework, the way that we think about how you emerge stronger, how you develop the resilience. And what we're showing here is basically you have your first phase is you face your disruption. You have to quickly mobilize, you have to quickly understand the risks and initiate any mitigating actions. This is more, first phase is more focused on people. So how do you ensure that the people that work for you are safe and ensure that you're also protecting your core business, and you start preparing, assessing the damage, preserving cash. This is definitely the time when you start looking for options to better handle your cash and your position in terms of cash and stabilize it, and then later start thinking as how you prepare for recovery. And this is something that probably happened in March, April for most of the companies in our region. Probably sooner if you think about Asia. They were going through this disruption probably December, January. So once you analyze, you mobilize, you mitigate, then you start looking at recovery. During recovery, you rebalance the business and start rebounding and looking and developing strategies where you can rebound stronger than competitors. How do you do this? You start looking at portfolio priorities. Therefore, invest in areas where you see growth opportunities and disinvest in areas that are not as critical for the business. You continue containing your costs and you start looking at how you protect your supply capacity and rebalance that capacity and develop your strategy to win. Once you recover and you rebalance, then you start looking at how do you gain competitive advantage. So this is where you strengthen your financials. You look at new market opportunities. So scaling operations, looking at mergers and acquisitions opportunities, and increasing your margins and creating customer loyalty by reinvesting in these types of capacities. And finally, resilience. So how do you establish your resilience? Yeah, you start looking at diversifying portfolios, securing your financial flexibility, and other types of strategies. So how you flow through these phases and how quickly you move from a disruption phase to a recovery phase to a competitive advantage phase varies. It varies by industry. It varies by region. It varies by how strong you were when you first started the crisis or the disruption. But definitely the main difference between the leaders and between the winners from a crisis are those that are able to really look further than what is happening, then look further than your day-to-day, look further than what is disrupting now, and start thinking about how you gain competitive advantage and how you take advantage of the situations that are presented to you by your competitors and their weaknesses. So what I have here are some ideas of how you face end-to-end supply chain actions and focus on risk mitigation when you're during this first phase disruption and recovery, which again, as I said, is something that probably happened around March, April, May in our part of the world. So this is something that you as companies must have faced already. So looking at how you mitigate the risk in supply, how you recover your production, ensure your workforce safety, assess the impacts on operators, deal with the regulators, and start collaborating with the regulators, and then move further along on the supply chain on how you optimize your logistics and how you profile your demand. And again, look at what the customers are demanding and try to provide some flexibility as to how you respond to demands. And once you're, again, going through recovery and disruption, you start thinking about competitive advantage. So how do you gain competitive advantage? How do you move into the resilience phase and strengthen your capabilities, making the best of the situations that arise? Again, looking at end-to-end supply chain visibility, incorporating technology, incorporating digital readiness to be able to provide data and analysis. The more data and the more analytics you can do, the better off you'll be positioning yourself. Again, so keywords in terms of how you build your competitive advantage and your resilience would be collaboration. So collaborations with your customers, understanding their demands, understanding their changes in what they're consuming. Diversifying. So diversifying is something that's also critical. So how do you diversify in terms of your suppliers, in terms of if transportation, in terms of storage, building flexibility in your storage capacity and your transportation capacity as well. So optimizing your scale, you're reevaluating your models and how you respond, and again looking at different ways of building flexibility in your manufacturing ability. And again, you can't stress enough the importance of data analytics. So estimating impact, identifying new sources of growth, and using artificial intelligence, using robotics, using automation as much as possible to be able to understand where the trends are moving and how you can better respond to those trends in a very, very flexible and agile way. That's what I wanted to share with you very quickly, our framework and how we propose to visualize these disruptions and these changes in order to better position yourself and gain the flexibility and competitive advantage to become more resilient in the following months. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Now we're going to hear from Chris Torrance. He's partner at Control Risk based in Beijing. He is responsible for growing the company's outbound China business, managing a team of consultants in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong that advises both state-owned and private Chinese multinational companies operating globally. Before this, Chris was based in London, where he led the global risk analysis practice for Europe and Africa, managing a 40-strong team responsible for all political, operational, and security risk analysis undertaken across the region, via both online and consulting channels. Before moving back to London, Chris was Director of Compliance, Forensics, and Intelligence for China and General Manager in Shanghai, where he lived for 11 years. He also worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Shanghai and for government relations and business advisory firm Batey Bourne, subsequently acquired by APCO in Hong Kong. Chris first worked for Control Risk as Asia Pacific analyst between 1989 and 1994. He is certified fraud examiner and holds an MBA from the China Europe International Business School in Shanghai. He has a BA honors degree in modern Chinese studies from the University of Leeds in the UK. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us today. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I mean, I have a number of comments to make, but I believe I'll be in a discussion with Steve from the British Chamber.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. This is Stephen Lynch. I'm the Managing Director of the British Chamber of Commerce here in China. It's absolutely a pleasure to be on the line with everyone today. This is actually 9 p.m. our evening, so 9 a.m. your breakfast. I think this is one of the pros of the good things of COVID-19, that technology has opened us up, allowing us to have this webinar, us sitting here in China, and obviously everyone else sitting in the Dominican Republic. So obviously we're going to be talking about supply chain resilience today. And I think obviously China is in a very different situation to the rest of the world. It's obviously maybe in a different situation to the Dominican Republic. So this is a webinar. We previously went and jumped right on webinars, but we've actually now moved back to face-to-face meetings. So it's actually quite nice to get back to a webinar and to be speaking with people all around the world. As mentioned today, we're going to be discussing supply chain resilience. And it's often said that if China sneezes, Asia catches a cold. And that's mainly because so much of the global supply chain now sits here in China. So with the outbreak of COVID-19, it's exposed the fragilities of the global supply chain. And we're looking, I mean, I heard Carlos talking about onshoring or nearshoring and localizing supply chains back to home countries. So today we're hoping to have a very open, honest, robust conversation around supply chain. So please do put your questions in the Q&A box, and that's for both for Chris, for Carlos and Kathleen. We're hoping to have quite an honest and open conversation today. But firstly, I'm going to start with Chris Torrance. He's had quite an introduction there, but one thing working for control risks is risk. So geopolitical, supply chain, environmental, regulatory, controlled risks does everything. And so obviously when we're thinking about control, sort of global supply chains, you know, what's happened here in China? What's the impact of COVID-19 at sort of a macro level? So where have we come from and where are we now?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for that question. And also thanks to Carlos and Kathleen for setting out at a more sort of technical, operational level all the best practice for supply chain resilience. What I'm going to do is to look at it probably from a more negative perspective, to be honest, trying to identify some of the problems and challenges that our clients face in the market. And to your question, Steve, obviously COVID's had as massive an impact here in China as it has elsewhere around the world. But as you can see from the fact that Steve and I are out actually physically meeting clients, I'm in southern China in a hotel at the moment after 3 face-to-face meetings with clients today, things are getting back to something like normal. The impact that COVID had on business in China, particularly on supply chains, was probably earlier on in the year when China realized it had a problem, probably took slightly longer than it should have done to tell the rest of the world about it, but then absolutely shut down business. And the effect of that was to emerge earlier and more rapidly than perhaps some other economies have. But it did mean that for 2 months, supply chains were effectively completely cut. We had clients all around the world calling us up, asking us to verify that certain cities were shut down, that factories were no longer working, that ports had in fact shut down as well, and desperately trying to get more information on the ground about when their factories would open up, when ports would open up, when the infrastructure would get going again. So it was huge, but I think we're getting back to normal now in China. The problem is that obviously the rest of the world is suffering, so demand has reduced, foreign business has been affected, and that's put some local suppliers into difficulties here because they have historically relied very much on that international demand.
So maybe just picking up on one of your points there. We've spoken about, I know I'm sitting here in Beijing, I'm looking out the window and everyone's kind of going about their business, but you know, China reacted in a very different way to the rest of the world. Now, again, that comes back down to its political system and the way that it could react in a different way. But is there any lessons that could have been learned from SARS that therefore meant that China's supply chain was going to be more resilient because they've been through this before?
So I think SARS it feels like a world ago. I was here in Shanghai as well in 2003 when that happened. I think at that time, China contributed around 3 to 4% of the global GDP. And China had just entered WTO as well, albeit after decades-long efforts to get there. 2001, it entered the World Trade Organization. So the whole process of globalization was just beginning. Plus, travel and movement within China was much more restricted. You had an economy that was much more focused on a provincial level. Today, of course, and therefore the impact of SARS, I think, although it hurt China, it wasn't as deep, and obviously it didn't hurt the rest of the world so much as well. The greatest impact, I think, was probably in Hong Kong or down in the south, parts of Southeast Asia. Fast forward now 17 years, and you have a Chinese economy that contributes 16, 17, 18% to global GDP. You've got literally millions of people flying around China on a daily basis, 250,000 people going in and out of the province of Hubei, which was the epicenter of the virus, and obviously international travel as well. So I think the one thing that they learned was that you have to shut it down quickly. And fortunately for the Chinese government, their ability to do so and the massive steps they've taken on the technology side in terms of use of data meant that they've been able to track and trace people very, very carefully. And I would say that the health controls here have been quite remarkable in terms of being able to monitor, track, and control the spread of the infection. So I was back in the office on April the 7th after a relatively short period of self-isolation and lockdown. And I think I've only had one trip actually up to your part of the world, Steve, in Beijing, when there was another outbreak. So it's testament to their control that the economy has been able to develop and push. I also did travel back to the UK about a month ago and was pretty shocked to see people walking around without masks, no really strictly enforced period of self-isolation or quarantine. So say what you like about the Chinese government, that strong level of centralized authority has actually helped to help the economy to recover pretty rapidly.
So then maybe let's kind of further dig deeper into that. When we talk about China's response to the virus, there's been questions around, global questions around, has COVID-19 reversed globalization? One of the things that I would say, certainly from a British business perspective, that a lot of global supply chains do sit here. British businesses
We've lost you, Steve.
Yes, I think.
I'm anticipating his question, and I'm going to try and answer it, although he's only asked half of it. Yeah. So it's true that the coronavirus has, I think, raised a lot of questions about globalization. Steve, sorry, I think we got most of the question, but I'm jumping ahead. I believe that coronavirus has, of course, raised a lot of questions about the wisdom of globalization, and it is encouraging companies and governments to think hard again about just how wise it is to have completely global supply chains. However, I think that question was being raised probably it came up 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago when we started to see a polarization in government thinking, in political policy making as well, because as Asia and particularly China has benefited from globalization, its economy has done so well since 2001, since globalization really kicked off. It's benefited massively from an economic perspective. And of course, in the short term, all of us in the West as consumers, we've benefited because we've had cheaper products and we've been very happy about that and got used to it. The downside, of course, in the longer term is that we've lost jobs. The US has lost jobs. The globalization can, at least in part, be to blame for that, along with probably technology. So I think coronavirus has just sort of accelerated that discussion and that thinking around globalization. And obviously, as governments have decided that they need to do something about bringing jobs back. They need to protect the interests of their people and to keep their economies going. We've raised the question again around more, I don't want to call it economic protectionism, but certainly economic nationalism, bringing our stuff closer to home. And many consumers would be happy with that. You know, sitting in the UK, I remember just expecting to have all sorts of food flown in from around the world to be able to eat any food at any time. Is that such a great thing? I'm not sure. It's led to a lot of waste. It's led to a lot of lost jobs around the world. So why not get back to a life where one relies more on one's local economy? So I think it's raised a lot of questions on many levels, but certainly those questions were there before the coronavirus came along.
So I would like to commend our speakers on the wealth of knowledge that all of you have been sharing with us during this webinar. And Chris, I'd like to ask you, do you believe that a lean supply chain is a thing of the past, or is that philosophy is going to continue?
Well, I do think that the over-reliance on the supply chain in China has shifted the balance of control, perhaps, from the client too much to the supplier. So my working day involves a lot of talking to clients who are having problems with their supply chain, and that's not caused by the coronavirus or anything else. That's caused by their over-reliance on a supply chain sitting in China. And we have regularly had to deal with conflicts of interest among employees and suppliers, integrity concerns caused by suppliers who feel they have so much power that they can then force the client to do what they want. And back to Carlos's points as well around the sheer distance that China is from, well, for example, from your part of the world. That's 35 days to get your goods from A to B. It's still a long time. So why not bring greater efficiencies to that process by geographically, as you say, nearshoring? So I think there are so many different factors at play here, but certainly the advantages that China's had historically as an attractive global supply chain provider and location, they are being reduced through more expensive land, through more expensive labor, as China becomes a richer country. So perhaps it's time to start looking elsewhere. And obviously when you overlay coronavirus on top of that, that then creates more logistical problems in terms of moving goods anyway and moving people as well. So it may be that, yes, we are facing some very serious and fundamental changes in the way supply chains are constructed and maintained. But I would argue that that's happening on many levels at the political and economic level anyway. So there's a lot of rethinking that we're going to have to do as we head into a sort of a new era of doing business.
In your opinion, are there some common cultural traits of resilient companies?
Oh, that's a big question. I would come back to Carlos's points around thinking about the customer and putting the customer first, but not as a pure supply chain expert. I would also say that when you're looking wherever you are to set up your supply chain, you need to think very hard about the local environment that you're in. So in China, you've got to bring in risk management practices that really work for China. You can't just transfer something over pure best practice. You've got to think about adjusting your business model to manage suppliers in a more local, direct way that works in China. So I think effective resilience is being able to understand your local market, being able to work with your local suppliers and understand what motivates them. And we've seen so many companies that have been successful in China in terms of developing strong supply chain resilience, making sure that they've got people on the ground, not trying to manage remotely. So setting up wholly owned foreign enterprises on the ground so they can establish an on-the-ground presence and build a direct relationship with their suppliers, getting to know their suppliers, spending time on the ground with their suppliers. And then I think the other key point that separates perhaps resilient companies from others is, apart from being able to be flexible and to really think about problems as they emerge and how to finding original solutions for them, I think it's around rewarding suppliers' contributions and recognizing the contributions that suppliers make, and then rewarding employees. So really establishing a connection with all your people, whether they're your employees or your third parties or your suppliers. I think those are some of the key ingredients for success in terms of building supply chain resilience.
I see that Stephen is back with us.
Can I-
So go ahead, Stephen.
I hope so. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I do apologize. It wouldn't be a webinar without some technical issues. That's the joy of Zoom as well. I missed maybe 5 minutes of what you just said there, Chris, but I'm just going to jump in with quite a difficult question for you. And that's kind of the geopolitical relationship. We're obviously sitting here in China, US trade tensions, the Dominican Republic's close proximity to the United States of America. So when we are actually talking about global supply chain, we're talking about decoupling. What is the global geopolitical risk around having a global supply chain?
Yeah, and I think, thanks, Steve. I think we began to touch on that point, which was sort of, has coronavirus caused this decoupling or this sort of questioning of globalization? And my feelings are that discussion began several years ago when the benefits of globalization began to wear off, where having 6 cheap television sets and food that you can fly from around the world was all very nice, but if you don't have a job, then you don't have the benefits of it. So I think the US-China relationship, it has been maintained incredibly well over the last 30 years, but there's always been the understanding or the sense on the US side that China is still below the US, it's still inferior. What we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years is China emerging as a real threat to the US position, basically, and that's absolutely illustrated in the current trade war and the specific restrictions being put in place around technology. I think we're entering a phase where, whatever your political views, we're going to see a much more adversarial relationship. The gloves are off, as it were, between the US and China. Whether we have 4 more years of President Trump, in which case that decoupling will accelerate further and in an even more, I would say, haphazard and unpleasant way, or whether we have a Democrat government, and Control Risk's current view is that the Democrats will win by a narrow margin. But even then, we'll have a very tough US administration dealing with China, probably continuing to enforce restrictions and sanctions and tough anti-China regulatory legislation on China, but perhaps in a more predictable and established framework. Either way, decoupling it's a very final word, but we are looking at a much less globalized society, and I think the competition between China and the US is only going to increase. I think the big question for us, those of us not actually in the US or in China, is to what extent will that affect the relationship that, for example, Europe and the UK have with China. If we have a Trump presidency, I think the EU will turn towards China probably more rapidly than it would under a Biden presidency, where we're likely to see the alliances between the US and Europe and the US and Japan and Korea re-established. And that will allow, I think, everybody else to deal with a robust Chinese government. So perhaps that would be a better way forward. But either way, yeah, globalization is going to weaken. over the next few years.
We have a question for Vice Minister Guillermo Flaquer. How can the British Chamber of Commerce in the DR and your ministry help develop the DR as a regional logistics hub to help manufacturers build a more resilient supply chain?
Well, I think most of the components are there. We have in the DR, we have a very strong, hard infrastructure with ports that are world class, top 10 in Latin America. We have airports with really high connectivity. For example, the Punta Cana airport with the #1 connectivity in the whole Caribbean. We also have the third best maritime connectivity in the Dominican Republic. We have logistic centers, we have warehouses. So I think that in terms of hard infrastructure, we have everything that's there. The one thing that we need to start working on and work harder on is on promotion. And it has to be a strategic promotion. Not only letting everyone know out there that we have those capabilities, that we have that legal framework that allows for companies to hold inventory here in the Dominican Republic without having to pay taxes, duties, fees, and be able to re-export that from the Dominican Republic to all the markets around us, which we have approximately 300 million people just between 6 to 9 days. I think we have to start looking at potential companies, start targeting them. That's something that we're currently doing within the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, being strategic about it. It's about doing some commercial intelligence, picking up a 15, 20 companies that are more likely to be interested in this and doing some high-level engagement. And I think within the British Chamber of Commerce, I think we can leverage having some commercial intelligence on the UK and identifying companies specifically on the wine and spirits vertical, which I know is a vertical that's very prone to look at logistics center just because of the long lead times from the UK into other countries, rather in Central America, Caribbean. So I think doing strategic approaches is something that we can work on, something that we're open to discuss. And I think that with the British Chamber of Commerce, we can easily do that starting right away. You're in mute, Lil.
I think that, okay, perfect. So there's a question for Kathleen. Some may argue that collaboration with strategic raw material suppliers and external service partners is also vital to ensure a better preparedness and resilience for the future. What is your opinion with regards to this point?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I completely agree. And one of the things that I talked about when we were looking at how to better position the companies for gaining competitive advantage and making sure that they were emerging stronger than their competitors when a crisis such as this erupts is really collaboration. And we discussed this crisis, the difference with this crisis regarding the last 2009 crisis was this is a demand crisis, right? So really making sure that you understand the trends in consumer spending and the trends in how your customers are reacting and the things that are happening in terms of how customers are interacting with their organizations will definitely impact how we as a company position our operations and our supply chain and in terms of collaboration. So collaborating with the customer in terms of understanding their needs and understanding the trends in consumer, as well as collaborating with your suppliers and collaborating and diversifying also with the different elements in the supply chain. So data analysis, sharing information, using digital tools to be able to really establish relationships and links with all the different elements in your supply chain is critical in terms of resilience.
So there's another question. This is for Chris. What are the business opportunities that have been identified through this crisis?
So, gosh, well, the business opportunities in China that have been identified, I have to say our business is doing very well, risk management. I would also say, and the comments initially actually were referred to the key role I have, which is actually looking after Chinese clients investing overseas. We're seeing an increase in Chinese overseas business activity, although obviously it is more complex in some markets like North America because of the restrictions in place. But I think you have a growing number of Chinese multinationals which are increasingly looking for international partners. I was in Colombia about a year ago and was struck by not only the extent of Chinese investment there and some of the investment zones, but also the possibilities of trade that would go through Colombia and onto the US. And as Carlos was saying, I think in your part of the world, you're very well positioned to take advantage of this. So we are getting to a stage where Chinese multinationals actually are very concerned about their international operations. They're adopting best practice, certainly in terms of risk management, in terms of managing integrity risk, ensuring that they are behaving like first-class multinationals. So I think there's an opportunity there, particularly when they are shut out of North America, to make yourselves more attractive partners for these Chinese companies. So I'm sorry, I tend to look at it from the Chinese perspective, but within China as well. Again, those sectors that Carlos identified, and if we also add in things like healthcare, some of the obvious ones perhaps, but the Chinese economy is continuing to grow. It might only be 1 or 2% this year, but it's going to be positive, and it will bounce back and be stronger than before in a world where economic growth everywhere else is slowing down. So yeah, I think there are opportunities both ways.
So
am I allowed to ask a question? I was going to ask Steve what his view is of British investment into China, because from our perspective, Steve, we're seeing UK companies which are a little less excited about coming in, or I think they're more concerned about what's happening at home. So that's slowed down their operations. But have you seen any slowdown in that, or is there more interest in UK business coming into China generally?
So hopefully you can hear me all okay. That's the main thing. Okay, right. I think this is a wider topic because it also ties into the UK-China relationship, China's relationship with the rest of the world. And so we can't, traditionally China has actually treated investment decisions separately to politics, but there's a lot of blurring of the lines at the moment. And I think when we're talking about the China relationship from a UK perspective, from British business perspective, there's a lot of, I would say, peripheral noise. We've got the Huawei.
Damn, I knew I shouldn't have asked him a question.
I think we lost him again.
We've lost him, yeah. Oh dear, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But it seems like I think there's still interest on the, in terms of UK business into China. And I would say it was very much the case, it should be the case for the Dominican Republic and other countries as well. The demand is here. Even if there are problems at home, the demand is here. So, yeah.
Yes.
I think we
Organizations definitely must raise the bar on supply chain, innovation, productivity, responsiveness, and resilience to meet clients' demands in the most cost-effective manner. Thank you to all our panelists for giving us all these important tools and guidance. Thank you for all the participants on today's webinar. There's a poll that is running. Please complete the poll and you will receive a survey in order for us to understand what impact this actual situation raised by COVID-19 is affecting your companies. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.